Welcome to the Industrial Cybersecurity Insider. In each episode, we dive into the world of industrial cybersecurity. Join us as we cover the latest trends, innovations, and practical insights as we talk with leaders and practitioners across the industry. Gear up and let's get into this week's episode.
Hi, I'm Craig Duckworth, and today with me, I have Matthew Carr from Atumcell. Matt, welcome to the show. Why don't you give the listeners a little bit of background about yourself, kind of how you got here and what you're doing?
Thanks for having me, Craig. Excited to be here. My background is in penetration testing and red teaming of industrial systems. I've worked for a number of governments and organizations, banks and utility companies, you name it, across the board. Over the years, almost 15 years, the last 15 years in securing operational technology. I mean, there's a lot of different names for it, right? Some people call it ICS or OT. Some people actually, I think, wrongly call it SCADA security, where you're really actually just talking about one specific part of supervisory control and data acquisition, right? But in any case, I've been involved in what I would call cyber physical security. So, what's really interesting about OT is that the cyber is really linked to the physical, right? You can launch a number of attacks if you physically get access. And so, my career has been about adversarial simulation, testing those types of vulnerabilities, coming up with various hypotheses about what kind of attacks might work, and then going ahead and actually planning them, testing them safely, I might add, and then working with organizations or the government and to fix these issues and make sure our critical infrastructure is more secure.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. And you mentioned cyber physical systems. That's a term that I hear more often than OT. Most of the technology vendors, the Clarity, Armis, Nozomi, whoever that are doing that, they're starting to refer to that. I think I even saw where Gartner and Forrester, the agencies, are starting to refer to it as a cyber physical system, so that there's one consistent name, because it's OT, it's plant floor, it's control systems, it's pick a name. That's kind of like Industry 4.0, digital transformation, whatever you want to call it. It's how do we share data and really learn from each other? So that's good. So as currently today, you are with Atumcell. You are one of the co-founders. So help just a real quick background, I guess, on kind of where you guys are. Is it predominantly pen testing within the OT space, and how organizations can better understand help me understand really kind of where you guys are and what piece of this giant puzzle, which is very fragmented and not really clearly defined, you guys are trying to help solve?
Yeah, happy to. So at Atumcell, we mainly focus on three areas when it comes to OT security or cyber physical security. One of them certainly is pen testing. So we have a specialist team. I'm the lead of that team, and we carry out pen tests safely. We quite often work with organizations or clients to replicate lines or replicate infrastructure safely away from production, so we can thoroughly test it without potentially causing any issues. We are also experts at finding vulnerabilities in production networks. So we've actually spent a lot of time building proprietary tools that talk the language of the devices and the equipment as spec'd by the manufacturer. And so by doing that, we can safely enumerate what's on a network and identify vulnerabilities. That's something we do. So OT pen testing and vulnerability discovery is a strong point of ours, and we've been doing that since before it was cool, so to speak. In fact, I could tell many stories about that, and maybe we'll come back and touch on that. But the second thing we do is we do OT monitoring. We do that for a select number of clients, but beyond the service, we actually write those rule sets ourselves. So we provide the service for a number of clients, just really to enable us to keep developing our monitoring rule sets. And so these are rule sets that you can purchase from us, and you can plug them into common monitoring tools such as Snort 3 specifically, for anyone listening that uses that, and a number of other network security monitoring engines. So what we do is we have a team that looks for new vulnerabilities, whether it's CISA has put out an advisory or a CV that's come out. And we have a team that looks at that, and we either build a detection rule based on the advisory straight off with the information we have. But in a lot of cases, we don't actually have a great deal of information. So our team will go and get firmware, and we'll do something called patch diffing, which is where we'll look at the latest version and the other version and try and see the difference in the code. Maybe it's just the difference in assembly. And then we'll try and identify where that vulnerability lies, so we can create detection signatures and rule sets for those vulnerabilities, because that's one area that we feel is massively underserved. There are a few companies that offer, say they do AI attack detection, but quite honestly, from a red team pen testing perspective, there's a lot of attacks that to an IT or an immature OT solution is just going to look like an industrial command. It's just going to look like normal traffic. At least a good attacker is going to make it look as such. So we specialize in rule sets that really minimize those false positive and catch the attacks. And then the third part of the work that we do, it might be my favorite, is tabletop exercises. So, we work with clients, and we hypothesize a bunch of scenarios, and we work with the executives or the engineering team or the industrial team to go through those scenarios and just gauge where they're at and identify the gaps. We can, recommend to the client what they can do to improve their processes and move that needle in terms of security maturity.
No, I appreciate it. That's fantastic. And again, it's something that's needed in the industry. So if I go back, most people don't just wake up and say, I'm going to do cyber physical systems. I'm going to do cyber security for OT. How did you get your start? What led your career or you to say, you know what, that's interesting. That I'm going to focus on this and try and bring some relevance and some value to this part of the industry. Where did you fall into that?
It's a great question. So my background is in vulnerability discovery and vulnerability research and exploit development. I did a lot of CTFs, capture the flags, and was very active in research and presented a lot of conferences. So I've always been really into finding vulnerabilities and crafting these types of tools and exploits, let's say, to prove the concepts and help clients patch them or companies understand the vulnerability. And so that was really my background. And then I met a colleague, an old colleague of mine, a former company. His name is Mike, and we were working together doing some research. And he comes from electromechanical engineering background, so he's qualified, or he's a qualified gas engineer, works on industrial kit, and he was doing some really interesting research into over pressurizing gas units, sort of the physical attacks. And he brought me in, he was like linking out safety gates and things like that, all sorts of physical-based attacks. And he wanted to do some research, and we came together, and I was on the cyber side. And so my job was to find vulnerabilities in like the HMI or the SCADA system, or just the regular network, or, the switch that links the IC to the OT or something like that. And we were working together, and we actually were down at a large car manufacturer, a very well-known one, probably the oldest car manufacturer. And we were doing some research there, and we had a line to play with. They wanted to know, could we shut it down? What could we do? And me and Mike worked together and did a bunch of research. And long story short, we actually came up with a way that we could shut this line down. And that was the first time I had seen software that I'd written, or an exploit that I'd written, stop a physical process. And during that engagement, also, the exploit that I'd written could take over a robotic arm. And to me, that was the first. I mean, my background is in before cyber is software development. So I spent my life looking at code and low level bits and bytes and CPUs and whatnot. And what kind of wowed me, and still does really, is the fact that you can affect things in the real world with that code. And that was the first time that ever really happened. And so from there, I was hooked, because it's that bridge where, a vulnerability in the cyber realm can come out and affect the physical world. And for me, that was just, it was mind blowing at the time.
Yeah, no, that's, and we hear that often, cyber gets in the way of productions. It's an easy concept when you really think about the physical output of these devices. It can have loss of life, environmental impacts, and it has real world consequences. And we've seen that. You look back at, some of the history from Stuxnet to various, pneumonia or ammonia being released into the environment and killing towns, and, everything, gas coming out and getting ignited, and it, devastation. The physical aspect of what you just described can have real world implications. And, as we look to try and bring awareness to the industry that we're in, helping organizations transition and really understand their industrial posturing, if you want to call it that. How do they better protect, secure their industrial networks the same way they are their enterprise? Is really, it's a balancing act. As from the board to the executive level down to the operators, and where is that engagement needed to try and drive that narrative, and I would say from your standpoint, because it's a little different. You talked about one of the three pillars that you guys do at Atumcell is pen testing on the OT side. You ask 100 different OT professionals, they're going to be like, pen testing is absolutely hard. No, thank you, but no, thank you. We don't want to do it because of the implications and the severity, the delicacy, maybe is the right word, within that OT network. So what you play is a pivotal role in how to bring that awareness delicately to that OT environment. But as you guys look at the market, and as you're looking at organizations that are trying to figure this out, where are you seeing the biggest opportunities, and where do you see the biggest gaps, maybe the gaps that organizations should really be focused on?
Yeah, great question. I think the biggest gap would be related to what you're talking about. So firstly, a lot of organizations are afraid to test these things. And maybe for good reason. And I can touch on that in a moment. But they're can be afraid to test these things. And all I can say is an adversary isn't afraid to touch those
Totally
things.
agreed. Yeah.
So you have to consider that. I'd also say that from a lot of client sites that I've been on and jobs, a lot of organizations don't know the lay of the land. They don't know what they have. So a network diagram was created, when they commissioned the site, or, when the consultants came in, and you get a diagram and it looks great. But, when you actually start to enumerate the network and figure out what's where, they don't really match up, and it's drifted quite a lot. And, you realize some engineer had to have some kind of access to this remotely. So they put in a sort of SIM-based access point, and now they just piggyback off that. And, someone had trouble here. Sometimes they disabled that firewall. In fact, they swapped it out. They don't even like it. So it's gone now.
Right.
And, all these changes have been made over time. And so that to me is the biggest gap, because one thing attackers do is they generally know your network and your infrastructure better than you do.
True.
And secondly, they're actually willing to touch these things and exploit them. So if, from the flip side, if you don't know what you've got or where it is, you can't really manage it. There's an old quote from the founder of ABB, which is, you can't manage what you can't measure, and you can't measure what you don't gather. Right. And so it's like, when it comes to cybersecurity, if I go into an organization and say, how are you doing with your OT cybersecurity? They're great. We've done this compliance standard or NIST and whatever, but actually, they don't really know what's on the network, and they haven't done any pen tests or vulnerability analysis. Well, I would dare to argue that they're not really in a position to say they are managing it, because you can't manage what you can't see. And so, to me, that's the biggest gap. And we actually, as part of our vulnerability discovery, we do actually have the ability to map networks for some clients. And this really leads on to the opportunity, I guess. So the opportunity that I see for a lot of people is to map their networks. So we can do that in a safe way. As I said, we do that in a way that speaks the language of the equipment, and we talk the right protocols to the right devices, because really the issue you have is, the reason why kit gets taken down is for a number of reasons, but either because you're quite literally talking the wrong language to this kind of device, and they're not good at taking that. They're not like internet servers that are built to take hits and sort of take anything. Well, you might be dealing with a bit of kit that has very low bandwidth, is running on an SD card, has been for the last 10 years. The person who wrote the program is no longer with us. So that's precarious. And, that could fall over at any minute. And so, but by doing it the way that we do it, we can map these networks safely. And I think that's where the opportunity is, because you're right. A lot of clients or organizations wouldn't just go straight for a pen test. And I think that's right, because I think you want to trust the vendor that you bring in. That's a big part of why organizations don't pen test their OT environments, is, I think, trust, right? Because you do have to give people access to sensitive things, sensitive parts of your network. For a lot of companies, it's actually even, the secret sauce. It's what makes the company great or efficient or able to manufacture at scale and have the edge over the competitor. So, understandably, so companies don't want to let just anyone in. So I think you want to build that relationship. You want to be a trusted advisor. And a good way to start is to, start with mapping. Maybe you map some non-sensitive parts, or you perhaps even mapped for the sake of insurance. We're seeing that more these days. Insurance providers are actually asking for network maps and OT pen tests. So hopefully for our company's sake, the opportunity is in OT pen testing.
Yeah, absolutely. And we see the same thing. We go into organizations and two things that you mentioned are really kind of ring true with kind of what we're seeing as well. One, you got to trust the partnership that you have with whoever that is, and we preach this all the time, as a very large systems integrator that's working on the plant floor within these environments every single day, you find out who they are. Most CISOs or IT, they don't know who these organizations and clients are. If there was an event in an organization, who would they call? They don't even know that. So you absolutely need to have that relationship, and you need to trust them. And who better than someone that understands intimately your industrial network, that potentially built it, that's there to support it when something goes wrong, that troubleshoots it and accesses it on a daily basis. And the other thing that we see is the same thing you mentioned. Clients do not have visibility into their network. They don't know what they have. And you're 1,000% correct. You can't protect and secure what you don't know. You're going into it blind, and, you've got to have that visibility, so there's that piece of it. Also, as you look at the different layers within the network and you think the traditional OT assets, the Siemens, the Schneider Electrics, the Rockwell, PLCs, drives, the IOs, all those lower level devices. And then as you climb up that network stack to more of an IoT device, the cameras, the printers, the scanners, the things that are maybe a little easier to manipulate, that got put on the network 4 or 5 years ago, never had a password change, never had any security protocols done to it. That's different than a PLC that's been out there for 30 years, that was designed, built, implemented before the internet even started, and had no security in mind because it wasn't designed to be on the internet at all. So as you look at these assets and you look at these devices, it's becoming more prevalent and it's becoming more required to figure this out and understand what you have and how to protect it. Is that the same thing you guys are seeing?
Yeah, 100%. Generic passwords, default passwords are extremely common. These IoT or industrial IoT devices are actually a favorite of mine from a pen testing red team point of view, because they quite often have default passwords, or they actually just have really vulnerable web applications that you use to administer the device. Because from a manufacturer's point of view, they're just trying to get devices to market and quick.
Yeah.
They're not pen testing their software. They should be, but they're not. And actually, you could put your tinfoil hat on and say, maybe some of these that are coming out of some countries that are, on some export control lists, maybe have intentional vulnerabilities. Who knows?
Yeah.
But it's a possibility, because the amount of vulnerabilities that I see in these devices are unreal. And in fact, just recently, I was just working with the team to type up a report just yesterday, and it was in fact a smart TV that we were able to get root access to and actually launch attacks from the TV. Sit inside the TV and launch attacks from the TV. And you actually also, the added advantage is we did a proof of concept code where we can actually see what's being watched on the TV. So in this case, it was actually in a conference room. So if this sort of leads to other types of attacks, because I find what's really interesting about cybersecurity is ransomware did a lot for cybersecurity, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot for awareness. But the trouble is that most people think that's what a cyber attack is. So people assume I'm going to turn up for work one day, I can't access my computer, the line is down and there's skull and crossbones on my laptop and they're asking for Bitcoin or some other kind of cryptocurrency. Yep. And sure, that happens, but people are forgetting a massive area of cyber attacks, and that's espionage. That could be it could be nation states looking to gain some capabilities, especially when it comes to power grids and critical infrastructure. The holy grail of every nation state's sort of fifth domain of warfare capabilities is shutting down critical infrastructure. Right. And so they're not going to have skull and cross. They're not going to ask you for Bitcoin. Their goal is to remain undetected. In fact, there's a term called FUD malware, fully undetectable. So their goal is to remain fully undetectable. And so that's one area. Then you have corporate espionage. So you may be up against a pretty, Machiavellian company, and they're going after you. And this does happen. I mean, I've had companies approach me for this type of work. For the record, I've never taken it, but it happens. And I would, I am a reputable cybersecurity researcher with a credible background, and people still approach me and ask me to do those sorts of things. They would class it as sort of grey hat things. I still class it as unethical. But this does happen. And so again, you wouldn't, if I did take a job like that, my goal wouldn't be to be detected. In this case, my goal for this company would be to gain access to the TV and to siphon off every meeting and confidential slide deck that they put up there and give it to my client. Good payday.
Yeah, absolutely. Think of the implications of that. If every executive meeting you turn on and you record the slide decks and the conversation, the insider capabilities to either take advantage on the market or to ruin that organization in a different manner from either the positive or the negative is crazy. The trade secrets that come out of executive board meetings that could be taken and manipulated for whatever, that is worse than here's, the skull and crossbones and pay me my $5 million in crypto, because now I have information that on your roadmap, 1 year, 3 year, 5 year, 10-year plan. And if I beat you to market on every one of those, it could crush an organization. That's unbelievable.
Yeah.
And exactly. I don't think organizations think of that.
No, they definitely don't. And most people, most risk assessment meetings you sit in, they won't incorporate that type of cyber attack. And from the world I come from, that's the original type of cyber attack. I come from the days where I learned my craft. Hackers were supposed to not be known. You were good if you weren't caught and you weren't known. You definitely didn't take, you didn't claim any responsibility for any attacks. You went under the radar. Your goal was mostly to siphon off information and to increase your capabilities, maybe add new infrastructure to your arsenal, or gather information for whatever reason. So it's like ransomware. As I said, it did amazing things for awareness and getting people to care, but it almost got people to only focus on that and forget that there's this whole other world. And just just one more thing to add in terms of whole other worlds, because I could talk about many of them. You have you have access brokers, right? You have hackers who all they do is they breach an organization to simply have that access, and then they go on the darknet and sell it. So that's all they do. And again, like if you don't know what you have and you don't know where it is and you're not monitoring it, are you going to detect that kind of activity?
No,
No, you're not, right?
you're not.
And so I would say that's the majority of cyber attacks in this field because, as I said, including nation state capabilities in there, because most of the ransomware people, they're going after soft IT targets.
Yep, they are.
And also like a lot of ransomware groups, they don't necessarily want to take down a defense network or grid. They don't want kinetic warfare to be used to as you're not going to get hacked back. You're going to have a predator drone coming for you. So
exactly.
they've got their head screws on. So that, but the OT is definitely full of seriously capable, well-resourced adversaries, nation states, serious organized crime groups. So these aren't. We're in the world here where, you sit in a risk assessment, you say, script kids in their basement. No, not in cyber physical world. You're dealing with well-resourced, capable adversaries. And so you have to treat it seriously and you have to be proactive and get ahead of the risk.
Well, the adversaries have figured out real quickly that the industrial networks manage the cash register for the organization. If I can make that cash register stop and bring that organization to its knees, they're going to do whatever I want. They're going to give me what I want. They're going to pay me what I want. If it's a ransomware situation, I have all the cards in my hand, and they're really understanding that. But it gives those organizations that false sense of security of all my stuff is really tightly secured and I'm all good. I got this warm fuzzy when they really don't, especially when they don't have that full visibility. Back to, you have to understand what you have in order to protect it. And a lot of clients don't have it. So if thinking of the conversation we had and kind of where you guys are, is there a piece of information, something that the listeners could take back? And if they're trying to figure this out, or maybe they're partly down this journey, where would you see real value in a client investing money or trying to focus on to better secure their environment? What would you say to a client today is trying to go down this path?
Yeah, so if there's starting out down the path, and I can't believe I'm saying this because given I started in a technical field and used to sort of not be the biggest fan of the InfoSec department and compliance standards, I would say as cybersecurity roadmap for the cyber physical. So start by plotting that out. Start by getting buy-in from senior leadership. Start by identifying gaps. Just start from a real sort of project planning perspective and a very high level. And even if that's where you start and you just make those first steps, quite honestly, you're in a better position than a lot of companies out there who just like tend to ignore the problem and hope it'll go away.
Yeah, that is, trust me, a prayer and a cup of coffee is not going to fix anything. That's not the answer. A lot of organizations, that's their approach. So yeah. You know what, Matthew? Great conversation. Hopefully the listeners have gained some information. Incredible story that you have in your journey so far. I appreciate the information and, wish you the very best of luck.
Thank you very much, Craig. It's been a pleasure to come on and talk with you. And for anyone listening, we actually do have an OT security white paper that talks about one of our red team engagements. It's a nice bit of reading. It's quite interesting. It's a little bit of a, tales from the front line, so to speak. So for anyone listening that wants to download that and have a good read, feel free. It's available on our website, atumcell.com.
Yeah, perfect. And we'll add it to the podcast as well so that the listeners have access to it. It's a great piece of advice. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Craig.
Thanks for tuning in to the Industrial Cybersecurity Insider. To stay up to date with our latest episodes, be sure to click the follow or subscribe button now. And if you found this podcast helpful or have a topic you'd like us to discuss, please leave us a review or let us know. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.